A very warm welcome to everyone for today's lecture. I'm Dr. Aishwarya Mahajan and I'll be covering a few of the components of the cast partial denture. As we all know, edenturism is one of the most frequently encountered condition in our general practice, and its management depends on numerous factors like tissue and bone availability, the length and position of the edentulous span, the age and systemic health of the patient, and the general affordability by the patient. Keeping all these factors in mind, cast partial denture are one of the most feasible but technique sensitive treatment option for rehabilitation, which addresses both functional and aesthetic needs of the patient. Now, the cast partial denture mainly comprises of five major components, which is the major connector, minor connector, rest and rest sheath, and the direct and indirect retainers. I'll be covering uh, about three of these components and diving onto the topic. Let's start with the rest and rest sheath. According to GPT-9, a rigid extension of a removable partial denture that contacts the occlusal, incisal, cingulum, or lingual surface of the tooth or a restoration is known as rest, whereas the prepared recess on a tooth or a restoration created to receive an occlusal, incisal, or a cingulum or a lingual rest is known as a rest sheath. So the metallic component of the cast partial denture is the rest part, and the recess which we have prepared into the tooth is the rest sheath part. According to the McCracken, on the basis of the surface prepared to receive them, it can be classified as occlusal rest, cingulum rest, or an incisal rest. According to Stewart's, on the basis of the function, they can be either primary or secondary rest. The rest that is the part of a retentive clasp assembly is referred to as primary rest. Here we can see this is the primary rest. It's the part of a retentive clasp. Whereas the rest that is responsible for additional support or indirect retention is known as the auxiliary rest. Now the function, it provides vertical support for RPT. It maintains component in their planned position. It maintains established occlusal relationship, prevent impingement of denture, restores the tip topography. The forces transmitted from the prosthesis to an abutment should be direct apically downwards the long axis of the tooth, right, like this. As in this manner, stress can be absorbed by the fibers of the periodontal ligament without damaging the ligament or the supporting bone. The rest must prevent apical displacement of the prosthesis. If this is not accomplished, the underlying hard and soft tissue may damage. The rest should be shallow and saucer shaped and should function like a ball and socket joint. This geometry permits dissipation of potentially harmful lateral forces onto the tooth. Now, starting with the first type, that is the occlusal rest and rest sheath. The shape of this should be triangular, which has a rounded apex and the apex directed towards the center of the occlusal surface, as we can appreciate in the diagram. The shape of the rest should follow the outline of the mesial or distal fossa, which has been chosen in the abutment. The occlusal rest should occupy 1/3 the mesodistal diameter of the abutment, and it should occupy 1/2 the buccolingual width of the tooth from the cusp tip to cusp tip. The notable part is it is not from the highest point of contour but from the cusp tip to cusp tip. The occlusal floor uh, of the rest must incline slightly towards the center of the tooth so that the transmitted occlusal force is directed towards the long axis, that is the vertical axis of the tooth. The angle formed by the line dropped down the proximal surface of the tooth parallel to the long axis of the tooth, and the floor of the rest sheath must be less than 90 degrees. So here we can appreciate this angle is less than 90 degree, which is achieved by sloping it towards the center of the tooth. Now, if the force are applied on two inclined planes, it tends to differ from each other and provides destructive and dislodging forces. This principle is applicable here. So if this angle is greater than 90 degree as appreciated in the diagram, when occlusal forces are directed over it, it tends to displace the metallic component, that is the prosthesis, away from the tooth, and a dislodging force is applied on the prosthesis. Whereas it also impart forces onto the tooth, which uh, allow for an orthodontic movement of the tooth and eventually loosening and periodontal compromisation of the tooth. So to prevent this, and if the occlusal rest preparation is inclined apically towards the reduced marginal ridge, or when it cannot be modified or deepened because of the fear of perforation of the enamel, a secondary occlusal rest can be given onto the tooth. The primary, which was already been given, and another rest is also provided over it. It prevents the slippage of the rest and the orthodontic movement of the tooth. When viewed in cross section, the deepest portion of the occlusal rest should be located near the center of the mesial distal fossa, and from this point, the rest should generally rise towards the marginal ridge. At the thinnest portion, it should be at least 0.5 mm thick, and at the thickest portion, which is at the marginal ridge, it should be 1 to 1.5 mm. The most common mistake in occlusal rest preparation is insufficient reduction of the marginal ridge, which eventually lead to the fracture of either the tooth or the metallic component, as its thickness is not appropriate for the retention. Now, the some additional type of occlusal rest that can be prepared. First is the extended occlusal rest. It is given in tipped molars. In severely tipped molar, occlusal rest may take a form of an onlay, as we can see in this diagram. This rest should be exceeded more than one half the mesiodistal width of the tooth and one third the buccolingual width of the tooth. And the preparation should be rounded with no undercuts or sharp angles. The another type of rest is interproximal rest. The design of the direct retainer assembly may require the use of an interproximal occlusal rest. The example is embrasure clasp. The preparation must be extended farther lingually in such situations. It prevents proximal wedging by the framework. The joint rests are designed to shunt food away from the contact point, and it should always be taken care to avoid reducing or eliminating the contact points of the abutment tooth. Occlusal rest can also be given on amalgam restoration, but unfavorable flow character and poor tensile strength of amalgam increases the probability of the restoration failure. So earlier, it is an older practice. When on amalgam restoration, we used to prepare the occlusal rest, but the newer practice is uh, use often cast restoration for preparing an occlusal rest in a compromised abutment. So here a wax pattern itself, we carve out the occlusal rest as we have discussed earlier in the same manner, and then the cast restoration is casted and then cemented on the abutment tooth, and a metal framework can be fit on this occlusal rest sheet. Then internal occlusal rest, a partial denture that is totally supported by means of cast retainer on all abutment teeth may use intracoronal rest for both occlusal support and horizontal stabilization. Moving away from the occlusal rest, now we'll start with cingulum or lingual rest. These are indicated in the anterior abutment and are usually used as an indirect or auxiliary rest. Now we have two canines. This is the maxillary canine and a mandibular canine. Here we can appreciate that at the cingulum portion, the width of the enamel for the mandibular canine is way less than that of maxillary canine. So usually mandibular canines are not ideal for choosing as an abutment when we are giving in cingulum rest, whereas maxillary canines are appropriate for it. So there is a law of Lever which states that if the distance from the center of rotation increases, the required force decreases to achieve the same torque. which means that if I apply same amount of force from the incisal rest and the cingulum rest, then the orthodontic tooth movement or the rotational movement of the tooth is more when the force is applied from incisal rest. So, an lingual rest is always preferred over the incisal rest. A slightly rounded V shaped when viewed in cross section is the shape of the cingulum rest. This geometry prevents migration of the abutment away from the removable partial denture framework. The preparation should display upright lingual walls that originate at the level of cingulum and extend incisally. The remaining walls should originate at the crest of the cingulum and incline bucco-gingivally towards the center of the tooth. When viewed from the lingual aspect, the outline of the lingual rest should be crescent shape. This provides a freedom of movement in the mesodistal direction. The lingual rest sheets can also be prepared on the cast restoration, similarly as we have done discussed in the occlusal rest. Here also, the rest can be prepared in the wax pattern, then casted and cemented on to the abutment. Moving on, the next type of rest is incisal rest and rest sheet. These are the least desirable one because aesthetic is also compromised and the teeth are also not that sound to provide that much of retention in the anterior region, especially in mandible. So these are only indicated when the abutments are sound and the cast restorations are not indicated and predominantly as an auxiliary rest or an indirect retainer. So a V-shaped notch is fabricated on the lingual surface, which moves on to the labial surface. And it should be at least 1.5 to 2 mm from the proximal incisal angle of the tooth. Its depth should be about 1.5 mm and its width should be about 2.5 mm. The contact point is not involved in the preparation of the rest sheet. This point should be kept in mind that while preparing this rest sheet, the lingual contact point should never be touched. The incisal rest sheet approaches from the lingual surface and crosses the incisal edge and extend onto the facial surface of the abutment and hence compromising the aesthetics. So this is all about the rest and the rest sheets. Moving on to the next topic, that is the direct retainer. The retention is the quality of a removable partial denture which resists the force of gravity and adhesiveness of food and the forces associated with the opening of the jaw. A removable partial denture must include components that prevents displacement of the prosthesis from the patient's mouth during function. And this ensures effective prosthesis retention and minimizes the transmission of detrimental forces onto the associated abutment and the supporting tissue. Now moving on to the classification or the type of direct retainers that we have. First, it is classified as intracoronal and extracoronal retainer. The intracoronal retainers uh, are fabricated within the confinement of the abutment tooth, and these can again be divided into precision and semi-precision attachment. Whereas the extracoronal retainers are outside the confinement of the abutment tooth, and these can be retentive type, which are again classified as into a suprabulge and infrabulge clasp and attachments. So we'll read each of these components in details now. So starting with the intracoronal direct retainers, these were first introduced by Hermes E.S. Charles in 1906. The retainer consists of two distinct components. First component, which is known as the matrix, is a metal receptacle gained within the normal clinical contours of a fixed restoration. And the second component is patrix, which is attached to the associated removable partial denture. When multiple attachments are used, precise parallelism of the matrix component is essential. This results in a well-defined path of insertion and removal and aids into the retention. An intracoronal direct retainer resides within the normal contour of the abutment and function to retain and stabilize the removable partial denture. When the RPD is placed in mouth, two components interlock in sliding joint configuration and lock within each other, retaining the removable part of the prosthesis with the fixed part of the prosthesis. Now, these can be of two types. First is the precision attachment. If the components are fabricated in metal using high precision manufacturing techniques, they are considered as precision attachment. And these usually exhibit long parallel walls and exceptional surface adaptation. Whereas in semi-precision attachment, these displays a less intimate fit, and hence these are given as their name, that is semi-precision. And these components are usually originated in wax pattern or the plastic pattern, which are then subsequently casted into metal. And these often display a tapering walls, as we can appreciate here. Then moving on to the extracoronal retainer, these reside entirely outside the normal confines of the clinical crown of the abutment and consist of component that serves to retain and stabilize the removable partial denture when dislodging forces are encountered. These are distinctly classified into two subcategories. First is extracoronal attachment, and the second one is retentive class assembly. First, we'll read about the extracoronal attachment. These were introduced by Henry R. Booth in the year of 1900s and were later modified by F. Ewing Roach in 1908. These derive their retention from closely fitting components and which are termed as matrices and petrices. So here with the fixed prosthesis, we have the matrix part, and in the removable prosthesis, we have the petrous part. So there is one theory which is known as breaking theory or the stress directing theory. What happens that these uh, extracoronal retainer permits vertical movement of the prosthesis during the occlusal loading. This minimizes the potentially damaging forces onto the abutment because a swing-like movement occurs along these in a vertical direction. These can again be classified as rigid and resilient on the basis of the stiffness of the resulting joint. On the basis of the geometrical form, these can be key and keyway type, ball and socket type, and a push button type. And on the basis of the geometric form of these can also be classified as bar and clip type and bar and sleeve type. The advantage of extracoronal retainer is that these are aesthetically acceptable and are more and provides more opacally directing occlusal loads. Now moving on to the retentive class assembly, these were introduced in by Dr. W.G.A. Bonville in the year of 1899. To properly design a RPD, there are two important concepts that should be considered. First is the path of insertion and removal of the prosthesis, and second is the height of contour of each abutment. And both of these are determined using a dental survey and an removable partial denture. So there is another concept which is known as Prothero's cone theory, which was given by J.H. Prothero in 1916. So uh, he suggested that the contour of a clinical crown resembled two cones that shares a common base. So he says that like this, there are two cones and they share a common base, and this is similar to the uh, crown which is clinically present in our mouth. Uh, this concept was explained as an height of contour, which was given by Edward Kennedy in 1928. Now, M.M. Deven gave a concept where he classified these retentive clasp assembly into two parts, that is, suprabulge clasp and infrabulge clasp. Suprabulge clasp are also known as circumferential or occlusally approaching direct retainers, whereas the infrabulge clasp are also known as vertical projection, bar type, or gingivally approaching direct retainers. The suprabulge kind of direct retainers are also known as Akers clasp after the author, which is Dr. Paul E. Aker. So few example of these are simple circlet clasp, reverse circlet clasp, C clasp, embrasure clasp, and an onlay clasp. Some few additional designs are also given, which is multiple circlet clasp, the facial and lingual view, and an ring clasp. Now, infrabulge or bar type of retainers are often known as Roach clasp after Dr. F. Ewing Roach. Few examples are T clasp, Y clasp, modified T clasp, and I clasp. Now, structure of a clasp assembly. It comprises of four components. First is this A part, which is the rest. Then an retentive arm, a reciprocal arm, and a minor connector. This is the configuration of a suprabulge clasp. Now, for an infrabulge clasp, also we have a rest, a retentive arm, a reciprocal arm, and a minor connector. The three distinct segments make up a suprabulge retentive clasp. The first part is shoulder. This originates from the minor connector and projects across the axial surface of the abutment. Then we have the relatively flexible midsection of the clasp that continues along the abutment surface and approaches the height of the contour. And the flexible terminus that crosses crosses apical to the height of contour and contact the abutment on a surface undercut retentive to the path of insertion of a removable partial denture. So it engages the undercut and provides the retention to the prosthesis. So while we are designing a removable partial denture, it should be kept in mind then that when a retentive clasp arm crosses the height of contour, it imparts some force onto the tooth for seating. So at this time, the reciprocal arm should also contact the tooth. Otherwise, tipping forces will be applied onto the tooth and it will cause tipping and periodontal destruction of the tooth. This can again be appreciated in this diagram. When the retentive arm crosses the height of the contour, it imparts force in the opposite direction and rotational movement occurs at the center of rotation. So if it is counteracted by the reciprocal arm, this rotational force will be managed and periodontal destruction of the tooth will be prevented. The abutment surface to be contacted by the reciprocal element can be made parallel to the path of insertion and removal. This will move the height of contour to a more apical location, which we can see by a solid line and permit appropriate vertical relation between the retentive clasp and the reciprocal element. When considering the clasp assemblies, importance of minor connector must not be overlooked as they serve as number one, a guiding plane to direct insertion and removal of the removable partial dentures. Second, a reciprocal element to counteract non-axial forces produced by the retentive clasp. And third, an approach arm of an infrabulge clasp. Now, there are six basic requirements of a clasp assembly. First is the retention. Second, support, stability, reciprocation, encirclement, and passivity. We'll read each of the following in detail. Starting with the retention, it is the quality of the clasp assembly that resists forces acting to dislodge components away from the supporting tissue. Each part contributes some critical features. The retentive arm must be designed so that only the clasp terminal engages the prescribed undercut. The accompanying rest must provide support so the clasp terminus is maintained in an optimal location. The minor connector must be sufficiently rigid to ensure proper stability and function of parts of the clasp assembly. The reciprocal element must contact the abutment slightly before the retentive element contact the tooth, and it must maintain the contact until the prosthesis is fully seated to protect the abutment from potentially destructive lateral forces. The component must provide sufficient encirclement to prevent movement of the abutment away from the associated clasp assembly, otherwise retention will be lost. The indirect retainer must resist force acting to the dislodge uh, the indirect retainer must resist force acting to dislodge the prosthesis from its fully seated position. The amount of retention provided by clasp assembly is dependent on factors such as type of the clasp used, the flexibility of the retentive arm, axial coverage of the tooth surface, apical to the height of contour. The supra bulge and infra bulge of clasp. So the suprabulge clasp provides push type of retention, whereas the infrabulge type provides pull type of retention. So Dr. Stone in 1936 suggested that removal of infrabulge clasp requires significantly more force than suprabulge clasp for its removal. However, this is not applicable in the clinical situations. So, for providing retention, flexibility is one of the major component. A rigid clasp arm flexing over height of contour may transfer harmful forces to the abutment. So, its flexibility is crucial. When assessing the impact of dimensions on flexibility of clasp, a mathematical formula, which is represented here, is given and it must be considered. So, as the formula suggests that the flexibility is directly proportional to the cube of the length, so the clasp flexibility increases as the length of the clasp increases. Also, the flexibility is inversely proportional to the width or the diameter of the clasp. So, the clasp flexibility increases as the cross-sectional dimension of the retentive clasp decreases. The thickness must uh, uh, the thickness has much greater effect than that of width. So the proportion of thickness to width is usually 2 is to 1. The impact it creates on the flexibility. The a uniformly tapered clasp is more flexible than a non-tapered clasp of the same proximal dimension. A circular cross-sectional clasp of form imparts omnidirectional flexure, which means it provides flexure in all the direction, whereas in half-rounded form uh, only provides a bidirectional flexure. The curvature of a clasp is more than one spatial plane reduces the clasp flexibility. The metallurgic properties of alloy influences clasp flexibility. Cobalt, chromium and nickel chromium alloys have higher elastic moduli than that of the gold alloys. And the clasp made from chromium containing alloys are more rigid. The wrought metal is produced by drawing a cast metal through a die. This process produces elongation of the alloy's crystalline microstructure and alters the physical property of the original alloy. This elongated wrought wire clasp exhibit greater flexibility. Now moving on to support, re- uh, resistant to displacement of a prosthesis in an apical direction is known as support, whereas flexibility is the quality of a clasp assembly that resists displacement of a prosthesis in a horizontal direction. Within the clasp assembly, the greatest contribution to stability comes from reciprocal element, the shoulder of the cast circumferential retentive clasp, and vertically oriented minor connectors. Now, reciprocation is the quality of a clasp assembly that encounters lateral displacement of an abutment when the retentive clasp terminal passes over the height of contour. The reciprocal element may be, it can be a clasp arm or an lingual plate or a combination of mesial and distal minor connectors. But it must be rigid and should be located on ideal location. As we can appreciate here, this is the reciprocal arm which is above the height of contour of the tooth, and this is the retentive arm where only the retentive terminal engages the undercut. Ineffective reciprocation occurs if the retentive terminus contact before reciprocal arm and reciprocal arm is positioned on a surface with occlusal convergence. The next property is encirclement. It is the characteristic of a clasp assembly that prevents movement of an abutment away from the associated clasp assembly. So here we can appreciate it is more than 180 degree, and ideally the encirclement should be more than 180 degree. It can be of two type. This is, here we can see the encirclement is less than 180 degree. So this is an example of an ineffective encirclement. The passivity is the quality of a clasp assembly that prevents the transmission of adverse forces to the associated abutment when the prosthesis is completely seated. The retentive clasp may remain active if the clasp assembly is not fully seated onto the abutment. Sustained non-axial stress on the abutment may cause discomfort, damage to the abutment, or premature failure of the RPD. The location of the retentive clasp terminus. The retentive clasp should be positioned on the facial surface of the abutment if appropriate contours are present. Still, abutment contours sometimes favor lingual placement, preferred in molar instead of premolars. Now, type of clasp. First, we'll start with the circumferential clasp. It was introduced by Nesbitt in 1916. It is the design of choice for tooth-supported removable partial prosthesis because of its excellent support, bracing, and retentive properties. It displays close adaptation to the abutment and therefore minimizes the entrapment of the foot debris. Now, there are some design rules. First says that clasp should originate from a point of the framework that lies above the height of contour. The terminal third of the retentive clasp should pass over the height of contour and enters the infrabulge portion of the abutment, and the reciprocal element should be located at or slightly above the height of contour of the opposite surface of the tooth and should prevent lateral displacement of the abutment. A properly designed suprabulge retentive arm should possess here we can appreciate long, generally curving contour with retentive clasp terminal pointing towards the occlusal surface. A short clasp that curves toward the gingiva is not acceptable. As we can see, this is an unacceptable clasp assembly. Now, starting with the suprabulge clasp, first clasp that we'll discuss is simple circlet design. The clasp of choice for tooth-supported removable partial denture. It originates on the proximal surface of the abutment adjacent to the edentulous area, with the clasp arm projecting away from the edentulous space. Terminus of the retentive arm engages an undercut that is away from the edentulous area. The disadvantages are it is difficult to adjust. The assembly tends to increase circumference of crown, interferes with the elimination of food, physiologic stimulation of gingiva is hampered, promotes decalcification and compromises dental aesthetic. Now, the second type of clasp is reverse circlet design. A reverse circlet clasp is often used when the available undercut is located at the facial line angle adjacent to the edentulous space instead of the under instead of the undercut that is away from the edentulous space. Favorable favorably controlled stress delivers to the abutment upon loading of the RPD. The limitations are the shoulder of reverse circuit clasp originate from minor connector that must uh, traverse the marginal ridge of the adjacent abutment. In situations where inadequate occlusal clearance is available, use of this clasp is contraindicated. The clasp should have adequate bulk for strength, poor choice from aesthetic point of view. Now next is multiple circlet design. This is considered when primary abutment is periodontally compromised. It involves two simple circlet clasps joined at the terminal aspect of their reciprocal elements. So here this is 1 and 2. Both of these are the simple circlet clasp and the reciprocal elements are joined together. The next clasp is ring clasp design, often indicated on a tipped mandibular molar. Only available undercut uh, is mesolingual line angle. Then this is the clasp design of choice. Here we can appreciate the design of the ring clasp. Because of the length of clasp arm, additional support must be available to ensure its rigidity. This design helped to provide rigid and effective reciprocation of lingually positioned retentive clasp. This should not be considered when limited vestibular depth precludes placement of an auxiliary bracing arm. It is also contraindicated when the bracing arm projects across the soft tissue under. The next clasp is C clasp, which is also known as hairpin or fishhook clasp. It is essentially a simple circuit clasp in which the retentive arm loops back. You can see the retentive arm loop back to engage the undercut apical to the point of origin. The clinical crown must exhibit sufficient vertical height to accommodate C clasp. Adequate space between both horizontal arm must be present and it should not interfere with the occlusion. The next example are onlay clasp. These consist of rest that covers the entire occlusal surface and serve as an origin for buccal and lingual clasp arm. The onlay rests serve as the vertical stop and also aids in establishment of an acceptable occlusal plane. This RPD achieves both the restoration of the missing molar and establishment of the more desirable occlusal plane. Now the next is combination clasp. This is given in 1865 by Applegate, and this is modification of wrought wire clasp assembly known as combination clasp. The combination clasp is indicated on an abutment adjacent to Kennedy class 1 and class 2 posterior edentulous area when the usable undercut is located on the mesiofacial line angle of the most posterior abutment. Now here we can appreciate that this is the fulcrum line. The fulcrum line is the line that passes from both the primary rest of the prosthesis. And when occlusal force are applied on it, the prosthesis tend to move to and fro along this axis. In this diagram, we can see then omnidirectional flexure of wrought wire retentive arm permits partial displacement of the apical forces. So we can see here the forces are dissipated because of the omnidirectional flexure that is given by the Rottweiler clasp. The main disadvantage is it is more prone to damage or breakage. It does not possess the bracing or stabilizing qualities of most circumferential clasps. The next clasp assembly is embrasure clasp design. These are frequently used on the side of arch where there is no edentulous space. The clasp arm originates from the minor connector that transfers the marginal ridge between teeth. Occlusal rest should be used to support the embrasure positions of the clasp. Now, this covers all the suprabulge type of clasp. We'll now discuss the infrabulge clasp. These were introduced in 1800s, as I've already told. These were introduced by Ewing Roach, and these provide push type of retention. Flexibility of infrabulge clasp is controlled by first is the taper and second is the length of the approach arm, and these are more aesthetic in comparison to the suprabulge clasp. But the disadvantages are that it has tendency to accumulate food debris and does not contribute a great deal in horizontal stabilization of the prosthesis. Now the design rules are it must not impinge on the soft tissue adjacent to the abutment, should be smooth and well polished. The approach arm should cross perpendicular to the free gingival margin. To optimize flexibility, the approach arm should be uniformly tapered from its origin to the clasp terminus. Now here we see that it crosses the gingiva in a 90-degree angle. The approach arm should never be designed to bridge the area of the soft tissue undercut. Here we can see if the soft tissue undercut is bridged, it wedges the food into the undercut and then periodontally compromises the tooth. The clasp terminus should be placed as far apically as possible. The minor connector that attaches the occlusal rest to the framework should be rigid and should contribute to the overall bracing and stabilization characteristics of the prosthesis. The first example of the infrabulge clasp is T-clasp design. It derives its name from the shape created where the retentive clasp arm joins the vertical aspect of the approach arm. This clasp design is often used in Kennedy class 1 or class 2 partially edentulous situations where an undercut is located adjacent to the edentulous area. Now here we can see the parts of the the part of this class. First, A is the horizontal projection arm of the minor connector. Then the vertical projection aspect of the approach arm is this B part. The C is the location where the uh, approach arm crosses perpendicular to the free gingival margin, and D is the point of first tooth contact of the uh, clasp to the height of the contour of the abutment. Now E is the terminus of the retentive terminus of the clasp, and F is the it provides the encirclement to the prosthesis. Now, upon loading, the extension base is displaced towards the underlying soft tissue. Now, when occlusal loads are applied, it displaces towards the soft tissue, creating a to and fro movement or a rotational movement along the fulcrum line. So, when occlusal forces are applied onto it, it tends to move into the undercut, the retentive undercut of the prosthesis, and engages the retentive undercut if it is appropriately designed. But it is contraindicated in cases where the height of contour is located occlusally, because here it interferes with a lot of tooth structure. And the second contraindication is where there is soft tissue undercut. So it tends to accumulate food and causes discomfort to the patient. So in both these cases, it is contraindicated. Now there is a class which is known as modified T class. Here the component are same as that of Y class, but the encirclement or the reciprocal arm is missing. It is same as T-clasp but has a better aesthetics. They are often used when canines and premolar will serve as an abutment. They are used in Kennedy class 1 and class 2 application where the retentive undercut is located adjacent to the edentulous area. Now, another modification or another type of clasp is Y type of clasp. A Y clasp is formed when the approach arm terminates in the cervical third of the abutment, while the mesial and distal projection arms are positioned near the occlusal and incisal surfaces. The last example is the I clasp. The clasp arm contacts the abutment surface over the area that extends from the measured undercut to the height of contour. And here at part D, this is the only point of contact of this type of clasp to the tooth. As the eye clasp approaches the abutment from the apical direction, the clasp terminus makes first contact with the abutment surface at the measured undercut, and the contact is then maintained to the height of contour of the abutment. If properly designed, as we have discussed with the Y clasp, when occlusal forces are applied onto the abutment, so it tends to rotate along the long axis along the fulcrum line, and it moves into the retentive undercut and prevents the dislodging force or the harmful forces onto the abutment tooth. Now, in nutshell, uh, let with the help of this table, I'll summarize all the type of class. First, the circumferential class approaches from the occlusal aspect of the abutment, whereas the bar type of class approaches from the gingival aspect of the abutment. The circumferential clasp has a pull type of retention, whereas the bar clasp has a push type of retention. Circumferential clasp provides good bracing effect, while bar clasp provide less bracing effect. Circumferential clasp can be used in cases with tilted abutment, whereas bar clasp cannot be used in such situations. But the bar clasp are more aesthetic as compared to that of circumferential clasp. Now, indications of all the clasp. The simple circular clasp is indicated when the undercut is away from the edentular space. Reverse circular clasp is indicated when the available undercut is located adjacent to the edentular space. Multiple circular clasp is indicated when the principal abutment is periodontally compromised. Embrasure abutments are usually given on the other side of arch where there is no edentular space. Ring clasp is given on the tipped molars. C clasp is given when the undercut is adjacent to the edentular space, and onlay clasp are given when the occlusal surface of the abutment lies apical to the occlusal plane. Then next we have T clasp. It is indicated when the undercut is located adjacent to the edentulous area. Modified T clasp are also given when the undercut is located adjacent to the edentulous area. Y clasp is indicated when the height of contour is high on the mesial and distal line angle, whereas low in the center. And I bar is usually given in conjunction with the mesial rest, which is the RPI concept, which is usually indicated in Kennedy class 1 and class 2 situations. So this summarize all of the clasp and class direct retainers that we can give. Now moving on, we have the next topic, which is the indirect retainers. So according to GPT-8, a part of removable partial denture which assists the direct retainer in preventing the displacement of distal extension denture bases by functioning through lever action on the opposite side of the fulcrum line are known as the indirect retainers. According to Stewards, the framework component that resists rotational displacement of an extension base away from the supporting tissue is called as the indirect retainers. The function of indirect retainer primarily is it shifts the fulcrum line away from the point of application of the forces, thereby thereby counteracting the lifting forces and stabilizing the denture. And as an auxiliary function, they reduces the anteroposterior twisting leverages on the principal abutment, especially in cases of isolated tooth. They help in stabilization, act as an auxiliary guiding planes the anterior tooth against the lingual movement, may act as auxiliary rest to support major connectors, especially in mandible. It counteracts horizontal forces by providing support and stability to the denture. It provides lateral stability uh, of the partial denture by counteracting axial tooth surface with rigid minor connector that is connecting the indirect retainer. It acts as a third point of contact uh, uh, it acts as a third point of contact in the tooth structure to ensure accurate repositioning of the framework onto the tooth during rebasing and relining conditions. Now, these are indicated in Kennedy class 1, class 2, and long span class 4 condition. And when force is applied on such cases, the rotation along the fulcrum line as the rotation along fulcrum line as primary axis of rotation occurs. This can be explained by the principle of indirect retainers. So consider a beam or bar which is supported by fulcrum at one point at its length. Now start lifting or imparting forces that lifts the entire beam. Here, in absence of a retainer, the whole beam will be removed away from the fulcrum. This will act as a dislodging force on the prosthesis. Whereas if a direct retainer is given, then it prevents the lifting force, and it provides a retention of the whole prosthesis or the bar onto the fulcrum line. But if force is applied on one part of this prosthesis, then the other one part is elevated, the other part is depressed. This is how indirect retainers work. Now, to prevent this to and fro movement or the rotational movement along the indirect retainer or at the fulcrum point, an indirect retainer is given. Now, when a dislodging force or a lifting force is applied onto the prosthesis, due to the presence of indirect retainer, the reciprocal part or the opposite part do not move downwards, and this is how the indirect retainer works. In distal extension basis, the indirect retainers in the form of an occlusal rest uses the same lever principle to move the fulcrum line farther from the force and prevent displacement of denture away from the basal seat tissue. Now, primary axis of rotation, this is explained in 1880 by Becquerel. He described the rotational movement occurring within the prosthesis, supported by the natural teeth and soft tissue. In 1916, Prothero coined the term fulcrum line to identify the primary axis of rotation. So, this axis of rotation must be considered in the design and construction of the prosthesis. So when occlusal loads are applied onto the prosthesis, it on one part, so this direct retainer act as a fulcrum and the other part is lifted up. Similarly, when a lifting force is applied onto the prosthesis, the terminal end of the direct retainer act as a fulcrum, and a downward movement is imparted on the anterior part of the prosthesis. To prevent this, an indirect retainer is provided. This shift the fulcrum from the direct retainer to the indirect retainer, converting it from class 1 lever to class 2 lever. And when now in this condition, when a dislodging force is applied onto the prosthesis or a loading force is applied to a prosthesis, no anterior movement occurs. And this provides the mechanical advantage to the prosthesis and prevents the dislodgement of the prosthesis during chewing or mastication. So, discussing the mechanical disadvantage of an denture design, the clasp is always near to the indirect retainer, that is fulcrum. Then is the displacing force. The clasp is therefore working as a mechanical disadvantage relative to displacing force. There should always be effort to reduce the mechanical advantage of the displacing force, which can be done by placing clasp as close as possible to the saddle, that is the edentulous area, and by placing the indirect retainer as far as possible to the saddle. So in nutshell, what they're trying to say is, saddle, that is the edentulous area, we should try to uh, place the indirect retainer as far as possible anteriorly, as away from the edentulous area as possible, and should place the direct retainer as close as the edentulous area as possible to provide mechanical advantage. So here in this example, here you can understand it more easily. So when force is applied near the indirect retainer and in near the direct retainer, and indirect retainer is also given. If it is placed farther away from the direct retainer, it provides more advantage and more reciprocation to the force which is applied as compared to the one which is placed near the indirect retainer. So here is one example. In this case, the indirect, these are the primary uh, retain these are the primary retainers, and this is the fulcrum line along these two retainers, because it's a class 4 condition. So in such situation, the most farthest position for the indirect retainer is this last molar. In this RPD design, the indirect retainers are ineffective because they are placed too close to the clasp axis. Now, these are the clasp axis, and these indirect retainers are too close to it. But if we give two retainers, one at the back of other, in this situation, the indirect retainers are moved further back and away from the class assembly, providing more mechanical advantage in comparison to the one where it is placed near the direct retainers. The form of indirect retainers. First is auxiliary occlusal rest. These are the most commonly used one. These are located on the occlusal surface as far These are located on the occlusal surface as far away from distal extension bases as possible. Ideally, indirect retainer should be perpendicular to the fulcrum line in the vicinity of the incisors. So here we can see this is the fulcrum line, which is directing from both the primary direct retainers. So the indirect retainer should be placed perpendicular as far away as possible. So in this situation, it should be given on a lateral incisor, but an lateral incisor comparatively is not a strong abutment. So instead of placing it here, we have placed it between the canine and premolar because these are strong abutments. Now, next example is canine rest. When mesial marginal ridge of first premolar is too close to fulcrum line, or when teeth are overlapped, so the fulcrum line is not accessible. In such situation, we provide canine rest. So these are the example of canine rest. Occlusally, a finger extension from the premolar rest is placed on preferred lingual slope of adjacent canine. Distance of resisting element from fulcrum line is increased, and hence more effective indirect retention is provided in such case. This is the example. Here we have used both canine and the premolar to increase the uh, uh, overall effectiveness of the indirect retainers. The cingulum bar or a linguoplate can also be given, which act as an indirect retainer. Technically, these are not indirect retainer, but in class 1 and class 2 RPD cases, these may extend effectiveness of the indirect retainer if used with terminal rest at each end. Then modifications area. Occasionally, the occlusal rest on secondary abutment in class 2 RPD may serve as indirect retainers. Then Rugays support, then a horseshoe shape design, because posterior retention is usually inadequate in these situations. The requirement of indirect retainers are probably greater than can be satisfied by this type of tissue support alone. From major connector, in mandible, retention from the denture base itself help in indirect retention. In maxillary arch, full palatal coverage is necessary for additional indirect retention, especially when only anterior teeth are present. Then direct indirect retention. Reciprocal arm of the direct retainer located anterior to the fulcrum line may also act as an indirect retainer. Then incisal rest on mandibular canines when mesial fossa of first premolar is close to the fulcrum line and produce tipping forces. These can be used. Then embrasure hooks. These are less desirable, which engages anterior interproximal area, used when less positive seat to stabilize the indirect retainer, and unaesthetic due to metallic display. Sorry. Double lingual bar or Kennedy's bar can also be used as indirect retainers. As these are less effective, uh, it rests on unprepared lingual surface, so indirect retention enhances by terminal rest. It is extended far from the fulcrum line. So this is all about how we can provide indirect retention in an cast partial denture. This sums up my topic. And these are a few references that I have used to explain all this, which is the Keratoville and Carroll's article and Ellison's article. Thank you so much. Have a good day. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture and you have understood all the components. Thank you so much for the patient listening.